dissertation work, I chose to focus on crisis, and I did organizational crisis. I looked at the Texaco incident. I don't know if anybody remembers in the late 90s with Texaco. There was a boycott of Texaco because of a race scandal within the company that they had allowed to fester a situation where people were marginalized within that organization, and it was found to be something that was systemic and similar to the incident of Denny's. And I used Texaco, and I had one national company and I did one local company. I used the May department store group. Remember the Lord and Taylor incident here at Fairlane Mall back in the 90s, where a security guard was involved in the asphyxiation of a mall patron over a little girl who was said to have taken a $4 bracelet. I think she was 11 at the time. And there was a scuffle between the security guard and the girl's stepfather, and it resulted in the stepfather's death. And I looked at that national case and the local case, and what I found was that there was a profound connection between the discourse of the public sphere and that rhetorical discourse with those organizational leaders. That we were no longer living in a day when companies could just, it was linear, when you just say this is what we're doing and that should be enough for you. The public was very powerful in those cases. And there was, this negotiated then relationship. And so I thought, look at all these cases where they're just, looking at this from a U.S. standpoint. I wonder what would happen if we took this and if we looked at companies that had a more international focus. And one of the things that we found from this case, there's the literature that talks about international crisis, there's some discrepancy. There are some scholars who believe that all crisis is international because of the fact that we have the mass media and the internet, and a lot of companies are doing business outside of wherever they're located. And then there are other scholars who feel like, no, that all companies are not national. We acknowledge the internet and some of these other platforms, but the focus of their communication with their stakeholders, some is more domestic. And actually what we found with BenQ was that the nature of their response was more localized, and it was more, domestic, whereas with BP, for instance, it was more international because you had the two locations. And I will say, in a lot of the text that we looked at for BP, they had newspaper coverage. It was covered heavily in the UK. And I did not find a lot of differences between the UK coverage and the US coverage, other than the fact to point out that he was, not hated in the US, but definitely had his feet held to the fire. Whereas in the UK, he was looked at as, they're using you as a scapegoat.
So clearly, that clearly is pointing out the cultural differences. And I think you all are really on to something there. Which is phenomenal. That really is, you're on to something there.
She pointed out, just this notion of India's image, and them the government being very concerned about the way that India's image was projected on a global scale. So you saw they swooped right in, and they immediately took control of this situation and really employed some positive strategies. We all understand that a company wants to survive. We want to survive, we want to make money, and so a lot of times that is what's driving these strategies. But, they did some things right. He resigned, they got, Ramalinga out of the way, brought in a new CEO, a new leader, and they really captured and protected that global image. You see, that became more important than what this man had done with this company. It was like, oh, you're not going to mess up the image, our international image. Yeah, so that was significant.
How has this been accepted already?
Well, it was accepted at a conference that we are unfortunately not going to be able to attend. So it's kind of, challenges and has some positives, because when we looked back, we said, this is two papers. We have two levels of analysis. So what we are doing is we're submitting it to our big conference, our national conference, but we're going to do a paper that looks at issues of ethics so that we can really talk about responsibility and transparency, and then we're going to do one that is a standard image repair analysis, and we are going to submit them eventually for publication.
Oh, all right. So you're moving. You're not quite there yet.
Yeah, we really need to cut this in half, because, like I said, it was a thick description case analysis, And these themes are so powerful. You know, they really, when you look at issues of transparency, the media, you know, the mass media, that's only one level. But when we talk about blogs and the internet and the power of all of those things, even with Hurricane Katrina, the imagery of that crisis was as powerful as the discourse.
Yes,
the imagery was as powerful as the discourse. And so when you look at the Newsweek and Time spreads, you know, in the magazines and look at all these images of the wildlife and the ecosystem that is, you know, continues to be affected by this crisis, it is unimaginable. And it definitely holds up there equal with the discourse that's being spoken about the event itself.
In fact, this brings me to the Time magazine spread of the BP oil spill. The cover page, they show this bird and all. That, I mean, you don't really need any discourse to tell you what the impact is.
And you have to, in these situations, you have to have rhetorical discourse. You have to have leadership, you know, that communication that speaks, you know, where it's equal. If you're seeing the destruction and somebody's trying to minimize what happened, you're not going to receive them too well. So the corporate discourse needs to match the level of damage that is perceived in our minds and is realized in our daily lives. That's a social phenomenon. We haven't gotten actually image repair discourse has really not been a discourse that has pushed us to look at the social impact, right? And how that influences what we need to say after a crisis. And that was one of the things that made me develop restorative rhetoric, was because we needed some kind of discourse that spoke to people feeling safe again after 9/11. You know, people feeling once again like I might be able to reclaim my home after Hurricane Katrina. You know, those are different kinds of situations. So we just happen to be in a field where there's a lot of different frameworks that really help us to understand the uniqueness of these kinds of crisis situations.
I'm sorry.
Please go ahead.
Have you given, and it sounds like there's even a third topic that could be emerging.
Oh, help us. Another paper, another publication.
And that is the effect of, forgive me if I phrase this like that, the effect of media on the repair tactics. And because 50 years ago, I imagine, had this BP oil spill, or even the issue of the Versace happened, within 30 days, it could have been hushed up. So how has the media empowered the people? And has it shifted the power of the corporate executives? Has it relinquished some of their power, given it over to the public hands? Because you're the private investors, and you have, it's just a lot. People can start, when there's commotion, it breeds doubt.
You're absolutely right.
You know, that, I don't know if you've given any consideration to that, how there's so many topics that are focusing on the media now.
That issue of technology, you know, even social media, you know, even just the social media aspect, and this is really not the only one. You know, Benita, when she was here, she did a paper on JetBlue's crisis. And I don't know if anybody's familiar, you know, that was
the airline on Valentine's Day debacle, where the plane was on the tarmac for 15 hours, and people had to get back to their family because it was such an important day the next day. Out of that was again greed there. The organization thought that the weather was going to clear out. It did not. And what people did was they were sitting in the plane with their mobile phone. They clicked pictures of how dirty the bathroom was. They were out of snacks. They showed crying kids and all of this, and they sent it on the internet. So within minutes, the crisis was out for people to see. And the image of JetBlue, which was perceived as a great airline till that crisis occurred. And then you had the CEO. He was the first CEO who issued a public apology through YouTube. He posted that video onto YouTube, and it had the highest number of clicks on that particular day. So that was the device that he used in terms of communicating.
I really think in terms of what you all are doing. I mean, you're talking about articles now, but I think you've got book material. I mean, with all that you said, that one is that thick, really. You know, you can only publish a certain amount of journals and